back in, and
Yeah.
now we can finally get back into it. I'm not even going to put that image back up because I don't know if that's what's interrupting us, but I do want you to continue to talk about the difference between shooting for brand photography and individual photography, because from
Hmm.
some people that I've already seen comment on this chat, I think there's a huge difference between shooting brand photography, and you're like I said, a worldwide photographer, so you shot more, have the experience. So tell me a little bit about the difference between shooting
Well,
brand and individual.
when we say individuals, I think it's good to define what kind of individual. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
for me, I tend to work with models, and so like birthday shoots and stuff like that, I do them very, very rarely. So that is a very different dynamic. But like photographing models, they tend to do it to grow their portfolio. So for them, a photo shoot that is specifically designed to build a model portfolio, the focus is to highlight the best features of the model in order to make them marketable. But it's also important to understand where would this model like to market themselves based on the type of photos you're
Okay.
going to take. And what this means is if somebody comes to me, and I know I'm in the Philadelphia area, so many of the models that come to me to build a portfolio, they tend to lean into the commercial world. Where they do work that's going to be for e-commerce or it's going to be for QVC stuff along those lines. The way I will photograph someone for commercial work is going to be very different than a model that tells me, hey, I want to go to New York and I'm trying to get signed by one of the major agencies in New York. At that
Okay.
point, so if I lean commercial, that model, I'm a photographer a little bit softer, a little bit more bubbly, more smiles. And then if you're leaning towards fashion, I'm gonna focus on giving you a bit of an edge and highlighting the features that make you edgy. Uh, and those are typically the type of stuff I really enjoy doing because it leans really into the fashion world. But like if somebody has really deep red hair, I want to make sure I highlight that red hair because that's what's going to make them different when they are competing with other models for potential work.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. So I know, like I said, and I can't pull up the image right now, but I know that you and I have shot individual photography. So where do you feel like do you feel like you get the most juice? Is it when it comes to individual photography versus brand photography? You get the chance to kind
What
of
kind of
highlight,
juice?
yeah, like the excitement, that juice. So when it comes to brand photography, when a brand is trying to establish themselves, and I know there's a couple brands, and I can see some of the people who are joining this conversation, there's a couple brands in here. So when it comes to brand photography, and I'm going to switch gears a little bit, but when it comes to brand photography, what are some of the things that you like to focus on or that you talk to the brand owners about?
It depends on what we're shooting. But number one, if it's for a brand, it's not necessarily where I get most of my juice if I wanted to think creatively, because you oftentimes have guidelines or you have rails or don't go too crazy because I'm still trying to sell clothes here, kind of a thing. So it's also good to remember that. Uh, but when it comes to brands, I think the key to it is identifying what you want your visuals to look like and make it something that can be repeated and it can be consistent. I think that is key to many brands. Oftentimes, you have been to some websites, even their e-commerce photos, you have something with a bright white background, and then some of them look gray, the other one looks blown out, and that doesn't make it into like a satisfying experience for
Mm-hmm.
your potential client. It makes it look a bit unprofessional. So even something as simple as what do the photos on my website will look like or should look like, it has to be something that you can repeat it and it can be consistent every time that you photograph your pieces.
So is it difficult to when it comes to shooting brand photography, is it difficult to shoot brands that have a wide variety to sell versus one different aesthetic? Because I know that there are some brands that are, fitness brands or clothing, whatever the brand is, they have a wide assortment of things. So when it comes to capturing that brand essence, how
Hmm.
difficult is it to make sure you have that brand essence captured in all of the photography?
Not necessarily that difficult per se. I think you just have to be consistent. And what I mean by that, you create consistency in multiple ways. Not only the aesthetic of the image, meaning like the way you're lighting the photo, the way you frame the photo, the type, even a focal lens I will use with my camera to make sure I get a consistent look, but also you have to cast the same aesthetic of models or the ones that you like to use so that there's that level of consistency. I don't know if you have a specific brand in mind that can be large or has a large amount of products, um, but I think you can create the consistency. I don't think I can hear you. I can see you moving.
Definitely. Okay. So, if that in mind, what is your do you have a particular type of shoot? I mean, athleisure is very popular now. A lot of people are staying home in particular style that you like to shoot.
No, I like it all actually.
Can you hear me now? Do
I
you
think
have
I
a
lost it again.
particular style that you like to shoot in?
No, I think I like it all. As long as it's fashion, I enjoy shooting it
No?
for the most part. I think I've
Can you
done
hear me?
stuff.
Wave if you can hear me. Can you hear me at all? I don't know who can still hear me. If you can hear me, please wave. Please send just a hand, a what's up, a thumbs up. And anything, because I think struggling on Wi-Fi network. A wave to everybody. Causing an issue, and every time we use the photo, it seems to mess up the wave. So not use that anymore. Um, Take that out. And photos messes up your video. Great. Lovely. Now, how am I supposed to show the work that Rue does? How am I supposed to show his great talents? Well, I'm just waiting for him to join back in. But if you weren't here before, we were talking to Rue Castro about some of the amazing fashion photography he did. I'm going to cheat on some of this before he jumps back on. But he has done countries from Australia to Thailand, way across the waters, in fashion photography, working with different brands to build join in. But he's going to be able to talk to how this content photography can really enhance a brand and show how it makes a difference in marketing. Now, I particularly am in the marketing arena, which I love, from building Facebook ads to sending out YouTube ads and all that good stuff. But what I really love about it is being able to sell the content. Now, he's talking to me right now. Hold on. Hold on. You guys, I'm trying to get him back in because he's really the meat and potatoes of this conference again. Hold on. But here we go. This is so stressful. This is so stressful. All right, so we're starting over all over again. Hey, Sunny. We're starting over again from the beginning. I'm not going to add any more pictures because I feel like every time we add pictures, it stops our live. So that's not what's up. So
Yeah.
we'll go back to the beginning. And I feel like I'm kind of sad because we have to keep starting over every time. But what I really want to talk about is when you work with a brand, what is the essence of, you know, getting to know that, starting that business to make sure that you're able to capture that essence, build that relationship with the brand.
What is the essence? It's understanding the brand. So that one is a little bit, I think it's important to identify that for different people, what matters is a different piece of a photo shoot. And like when you think about individuals like models, they care about looking pretty in the photo. When I'm
Okay.
talking about the brand or a designer, they care about the way their clothes look and how this image represents their brand. So it's
Okay.
a very different conversation. And I think if you can differentiate the two, this is a great way to like start like capturing clients when you really highlight and focus on what matters to them. For many of the clients is this is the way the clothes look, and this is how I'm going to capture them to make sure we get the best out of them. Or
Right.
this is the way I'm going to capture your brand to make sure that we tell the message that we want to share. As opposed to if I'm shooting for a model that wants to enhance their portfolio, then I'm focusing all on the looks of the model and what makes her her. Does that
Got
make
it.
sense?
Okay. That definitely makes sense. So what I want to understand is for a brand who is just starting out. I know there's a couple of people who I've worked with, and like I said, I'm on the marketing side. Ruth is on the fashion photography and the content side and creating that for those who are watching and don't know. But when it comes to these brands that are, you know, creating e-commerce shoots, how do you differentiate between e-commerce shoots and social media shoots?
They're two different purposes, two very different purposes. And I think e-com is very simple. It's a very clean image to highlight the product so that someone who may be
Mm-hmm.
purchasing on your website is what it makes them interesting in purchasing or making that purchase. So it just shows the essence of that product, and it's normally very, very clean, very, very simple. If you do have a model in the shots, they're often standing like a mannequin because you just want to show what the clothes look like. Once you shift it into social media, I think at that point the discussion is a little different. I think at that point it's more about the dynamic of your potential clientele and making it more about the culture, the story of your brand. It has to be more social, I think. As I know the name it says in the name, social media has to be uh, more social in many ways. You need to be in one piece in seven different ways and show potential clients seven different ways to wear it. I wouldn't confuse the two. Like e-com is e-com and social media, I would create content specific for social media. Even if it is you capturing it with your cell phone. That doesn't mean you always need a professional photographer. But do understand. Yeah, go ahead.
Right.
There are so many people. Go ahead.
There's so many people who think that they can use the same imagery across both. There's so many people who think they can use the same imagery across both social media, which sometimes, you know, the plain backgrounds and have that same imagery across social media. However, I think, like you said before, social media tells a story. It gives you a lot more room to play with background and filler content and filler imagery and different things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So creating that social media content and telling that story, what's the most important piece for a brand to know and understand? Like, what do they need to consider before just going into a photographer and saying, hey, I have clothes I need to shoot. How do I get this done for social media? What do they need to think about before coming to you?
This what story you want to tell. I think that's what it comes down to. And it can be something that's simple. I just want to capture some photos in the street in the city with a city theme or whatever it might be. Um, and that's a tough question because each brand is different. But the one thing I would say is you have like a second to capture somebody's attention. Uh, how often, when you're scrolling through your timeline, say here on Instagram, do you stop on a blank white background with one photo, with like a t-shirt on it?
Hmm.
Maybe sometimes if the design of the shirt is really exciting, but if something else is happening on the photo, then at that point you probably catch someone's attention maybe for 3 seconds or 4 seconds, and maybe they go to your profile and then they go to your website, which is what you want them to do.
Right. Exactly.
Hmm.
That makes sense. I mean, I do want to make sure that I have for if anybody has questions, please feel free to use the question icon, insert whatever to ask a question, because we're definitely here to take questions. But like I said, Rue, in the beginning, if you weren't here in the beginning, Rue has been shooting worldwide for a lot of brands and a lot of in the clothing industry. He shot models, he shot individuals, and whatever it takes to get the job done. Rue shot for like my images before, and I've been thoroughly pleased. So imagine that if my work has pleased me and who's been in magazines and etc. before, that there's so much more to understand. So for fashion brands to take that next step, what do you look for when you start to work with brands? You know, you're an established photographer. Like I said, you've worked worldwide. What do you look for in a brand before you start to work with them?
So I think there's two answers to that question, and I think number one is what am I seeking to do? Sometimes I'm shooting for the money. Hey, I got to pay bills, and I'm not gonna lie to you, it's true. Like oftentimes I will just go ahead and like I will shoot with brands because they pay and they help me keep the lights on. But then there's always those brands that tell amazing stories, and you just want to be a part of that. Like I use Urbane. Charles was here earlier. That's a great example of the story behind his brand and how much work he's put into it and what it's taken for him to get from point A to where he is now. And being able to like redefine his brand through images has been an amazing process. I still remember having the first conversation with him, which I don't think he believed me, where I was like, hey, I think I can completely change the way your brand looks like visually. And he was like, this is what I get from every photographer. Is it true? Uh, and it took me saying, cool, I'll do my first shoot for free. Let's try it. And since then, I think we've been working together for almost close to 2 years and it hasn't stopped. So sometimes you just have to be confident on your skills and
Definitely.
let your work showcase your talent, but also let your work show the potential of what a brand can be. Because I
Okay.
know if I hadn't shown Charles what these images could be like, uh, he didn't have a visual to understand. To him, what he was doing was working really well, which was till that point.
So I got a question, and it's from a visual standpoint. How do you captivate more people? Is that color? Is that action? Is that the story? What is it about your images that's able to capture people?
Uh, that's a tough one. I don't, to be honest, and I'll tell you that. So if I'm not working for a brand and I'm creating work for myself, I stay true to myself and I say, is this photo capturing my attention and makes me want to look at it more than once? And if it does, then I post it. Uh, so I'm not afraid to scrap my work, and I know that is something really, really tough to do. But there are times that I spend 2, 3 hours retouching a photo, come back the next day, and I look at it, and I was like, cool, it didn't catch my attention for more than a few seconds. Let's scrap it. That's not the one. And I think if it does that for you, if it moves you, then I show you. I don't know what other people may like or not like, and I don't necessarily do it for other people, but I do it out there.
Gotcha. I got a question from Hannah that's what makes a good photographer?
Haha, that's a loaded question. Uh, that's a loaded question, but I think if I had to answer it for me, it's not how technical they are as a photographer, or like how much do they understand lighting or their equipment, but rather how do they connect with their subject, how do they connect with their clients, and how do they interact with their team. And if a photographer can do that effectively, they'll probably be a very good photographer. If they can communicate very well on set, and if they can get a team to collaborate and come together to create, you're a good photographer. Because it's very easy to get distracted by the technology you have in front of you, this camera. And I've seen my handful of photographers that will focus so much on settings and what something looks like, that they will literally not talk to someone that's in front of their camera. Yeah.
So how important is it for you as a photographer? I know you don't often have the chance to establish a relationship with the model or whoever else is in before you start shooting, but how important is it for you as a photographer to understand your models, to understand what they're capable of, how far they can go? How, like, tell me what that experience is like. Do you have to push people often, or do you find that it makes sense to, sit with them beforehand and get to know their strengths and weaknesses before they jump into a photo shoot?
I think you have to become comfortable at building rapport very, very quickly. And I don't think you always are afforded the luxury to be able to sit down with a model before a photo shoot. Oftentimes, all you have is that introduction. And in that moment is, how do I build rapport? How do you build a level of trust that I'm trying to capture the best out of her or him?
Mm-hmm.
And you do that by communicating. Just keep in mind the models are people, and don't be afraid to talk to a model. I know that's something that when I was a younger photographer, I struggle with. But the reality, they're people just like you. They may be intimidated coming on set. It's just about making them feel comfortable and letting them know, hey, if I see something that's not working, I'm going to call it out. Saying this isn't working, so we can change the pose or whatever it might be. And I think that level of honesty as early as possible in the conversation, it kind of breaks the ice or any walls that we put up just from as a defense mechanism.
Okay, good. I got a couple more questions. So what everyday equipment, this is from Kendra. Hey, Kendra. What everyday I use when building content for my personal brand? Is that light, camera, editing? And I think this question kind of expands beyond, because it goes to a lot of people when they're starting out. Like, what personal equipment should they start to invest in first? What's the most important that they
Mm-hmm.
should use to kind of build their brand? Tell me which areas you started to focus in.
So what I would say is this: it's kind of like understand what are your like what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. And if it's something that you can dominate on your own, then yes, invest time on learning it and investing in it. But
Mm-hmm.
if photography doesn't appeal to you, then bring someone externally to capture it. But if you want to go specifically to equipment, like what camera to get or lighting to get, I'm not going to give you a specific one other than saying whatever camera you have on you is the best camera for that moment. And for many of us, it's our cell phones. And you can start a business. And like one of the brands that I work with that have an extremely well thought out branding and visual messaging. If you go to their social media feed, I would say about 40 to 50% of the images there are captured with a cell phone. And that brand is Human Aliens. Like we just did an entire campaign. We went to Miami, but if you still go to their Instagram feed, most of their photos were taken with a cell phone. So what it comes down to is understanding, hey, I can utilize the cell phone. Oh, my dogs are going crazy. I can utilize the cell phone and still capture great images as long as you know what you want the aesthetic of your brand to be.
Okay. That makes a lot of, I think, especially now with the camera phones upgrading the camera technology, it makes it very, I don't want to say easy because then it makes photographers obsolete, but I think it makes it a lot
Yep,
better for some people who don't have the access to full photographers and full studios to be able to
correct.
be that middleman in between their full photography shoots. So I have another question,
Hmm.
and this is from, hey Ish, but let's say someone is in media, what's the best way to get stills during the shooting process? So how do
This
you, capture the still photography, which is very important because you want to use still shots for promotions and media, et cetera, et cetera. But how do you make sure to get those still shots during video and filming and things like that?
video and filming, and it depends on what kind of photos you're looking at. Like if you're looking for that BTS kind of style, like behind the scenes, then
Mm-hmm.
have someone with a camera just capturing behind the scenes as long as they're not interrupting. And their key focus is going to be to capture what's going on and just capture everything. And Human Aliens is another example. Like almost 90% of the time I'm shooting with them, I may be the lead photographer, so it's always a second photographer who key focus is to capture what's going on. And I mean, he's looking at models getting makeup done. He just captured me taking photos, anything and everything that's happening. That is his focus. And that can be utilized later for social media. It can be utilized later to tell a story. If the question then was not behind the scene photos, but like get, and I think we froze again. You there?
Are you still there?
I can hear you.
Perfect. For a second. So one of the things I also wanted to talk about is, and I know I'm going back a little bit into the brand versus individual photography. So you've worked with several brands, and I think right now in quarantine is the perfect opportunity for brands to come out. So can you tell me a little bit about why brand photography is so important? Because yes, I understand that iPhones are great. You know, the technology has advanced so much, but can you tell me a little bit about why that photography is so important in order to sell a brand?
I think media is so important in order to sell a brand, period. Just because this is the way we consume information nowadays. And if you don't do it and if you don't put it in front of people's faces digitally, it'll be very, very difficult to start a brand. It's no longer like back in the day, you put up a store, you're in the main road, and most of your clients may walk by the store and come in. Now your storefront is digital. Your storefront is your website. And one of the key
Right.
elements of such website are the visual materials and how you present it. So I think it comes down to understanding, hey, this is your storefront. And the first interaction people will probably have with your brand, it's not the actual product that you're selling, but an image of that product.
You hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You're just freezing every now
Yeah.
and then.
I know it's just kind of annoying, but one of the things is cell phones are becoming great. Cell phone technology is definitely advancing. However, I do think there's still a benefit to having a photographer because, like you said before, having someone who knows your brand, understands the essence of your brand, and is able to capture that makes a huge difference.
Hmm.
So, can we talk a little bit about the difference between just capturing a couple cell phone images and using that to get by versus actually investing in putting photography out there and making sure that we understand that photography and, hey Chris, videography, we get the real people who, you know, who understand the definition behind what those things take and what matters behind it, what those things really mean. Can we talk about the
Yeah.
difference between those two?
Well, I think I'll make it easier. I think you're not paying for the photo. You're paying for the expertise that comes behind it. And
Okay.
I think that's the big differentiator. Because in theory, the cameras I use, anybody can buy it. Now, what I do with my camera, not everybody can do. The cell phone you use is probably the same cell phone I use. And the photos you're capturing with your cell phone are probably not the same photos I'll capture with my cell phone.
Okay.
So the best way of viewing it is if I'm hiring a photographer, I'm hiring someone for their expertise and what they bring to the table, not because of the equipment they bring to the table and what they can do with that equipment. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I know that it is very, I don't want to say it's easy because I hate to diminish the amount of work that goes into building a brand, because a lot of brands are, you know, going through the full effort of, you know, doing the back end behind the scenes detailed work. But when I want to talk about is actually using content to build a brand. So what I want to get into is really the content piece, because as a marketer, I really particular clients about the importance of content, about the importance of the right essence behind the image, because I do have sometimes where I work with people who, you know, talk about, hey, let's just use and their brand mission and vision and goal.
So I think you froze halfway through it. I want to make sure I understood the question. Is the question about you as a marketing person, you need content in order to promote the brand, but oftentimes the content you being provided doesn't match what the people are telling you the brand is?
Yes. And it's for you as a photographer to be able to communicate with brands. Like, how do you communicate with brands to help them translate their vision into a visual? So they say that they have a vision, they want to do
Mm-hmm.
something. So as a marketer, I'm challenged with turning a vision into life and presenting that out there. But I can't do that without the content. You, on one hand, create the content. So how do you work with brands to understand their vision and turn that into real life?
Uh, that's gonna vary from brand to brand, to be honest. There are brands that they will have someone, or either whether it's the owner, creative director, whoever it might be, that have a very specific idea of what they would like to accomplish. And me as a photographer, I'm only pressing a button.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with smaller brands, oftentimes I have to wear multiple hats, as not only coming in as a photographer, but sometimes coming in as a creative director to be able to translate some of the things that they're giving me in words into something that can be portrayed into images. And
Right.
part of that is how you choose to communicate. So utilizing a tool such as a mood board, I think is super important, and introducing the clients to the concept of one, because oftentimes they haven't done it, and it's hard to hold someone accountable to something they don't know.
That,
So I'll show them an example of a prior shoot and say, hey, this was the idea. This is what somebody told me. This is the mood board we created, and here's the outcome. And that often connects the dots to then be able to create that or replicate that for the client. But then we utilize their ideas or their vision, utilize a mood board to align to make sure that I'm hearing what they're saying, and then we go into executing. Um, does that answer your question?
it does. But I also want to follow up with that question as far as asking, like, how important is it for this content to take the brand to the next level? Because I think that's one of the most important questions of this entire conversation is a lot of people have been saying that, you know what, I can just use my phone, or I can just do this, I can just do that. There's a lot of shortcuts that people are taking, but I really want to get into the meat and potatoes of the importance of proper content to push your brand forward. So can we talk a little bit about the importance of, you know, getting the right content, you know, that visually, aesthetically pleasing content for a brand?
I think the brand or the owner has to come into their own realization that this is important.
Mm-hmm.
Because I get it. Oftentimes, as a small business, you're struggling to identify where do I put my funds,
Yes.
and oftentimes media and creating content is not at the top of the list. So kind of you have to have this epiphany per se, where you identify and understand, like I mentioned earlier, the first interaction someone is going to have with my brand is not with my product, it's with the media content I'm putting out there. uh,
Yes.
and and once they understand that, then it clicks for them. But sometimes it takes telling someone five, six, seven different times. And I'll be honest, sometimes I've told potential clients, no, sorry, I can't take you on because you don't understand the value I'm going to be bringing. And I think that's okay also. That means they're just not ready at that point.
What does it take for you to tell somebody no? Because I think with a lot of businesses who are starting out there, money is definitely a driving factor in getting their business off the ground. So a lot of
Hmm.
people will, you know, yes, I'll take your money because I know that I need it and I want to start my business. But when it comes to your brand essence, what is it that is your determining factors between saying yes and saying no?
Uh, that's a tough one because I think it depends on your position. Because I get it. Like if I need this to eat, then I'm probably gonna say yes. So I kind of come from a so I kind of I'm coming from a place of privilege in many ways, saying if I don't vibe with someone, I'm probably just going to tell them no. Like as soon as I start sensing a little bit of friction in our communication, or I'm saying something and they're not getting it, uh, I would just be, I don't think we were the right fit. And especially when it
Right.
comes to creative fields, uh, it's very important to be sure of what you can produce and what you're willing to do, and understand that not everyone is going to fit with your style and your way of doing business and your way of capturing images, and that it's okay. That's why there are so many of us, and there is enough for everybody to make it. Um, don't try to force yourself into a situation where you're probably not going to enjoy doing this job, to be honest, or taking those images. You may not even deliver because the client doesn't have crazy expectations. So then you put yourself in a pickle by taking on the gig and then not being able to deliver because the expectations were out of the world anyways. But I don't know. For me, it's a hard thing to answer. I got it. Sometimes you take it because I need the money, but if it doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel right. That's just my gut. I just go with my gut oftentimes.
Okay, so Chris just actually made a comment about using Fiverr, and I have used Fiverr for various different things, from removing the background from photos to, a million and one different things. So I do want to talk about a little bit about the difference between using some of these quick service, I guess, tools, like Fiverr, and getting
Hmm.
content quickly, to using an actual photographer. So talk to me about the difference between having a photographer work with you on your goals and your vision and your brand versus going through a quick service like Fiverr to get things done for the moment.
Well, that's the question. Are you utilizing Fiverr for post processing, or are you utilizing Fiverr for them to capture the image? Because I think there's a place for both of them. For you to be able to outsource some things. And if you can save money by doing it internationally, then do so. But I think for me, part of it is the communication piece. And at least for many of my clients, I tend to have long form relationships. It's not like I come in, do one shoot, and don't see you again. Like I have clients that we've been working on for the last few years, and I take multiple photo shoots for them every single month. And then at that point, it's building this work relationship that now we get to the point that we barely need to talk. It's kind of like, hey, I have this many things that need to get done. Here they go. Go ahead and get it done. Some business owners find that valuable, understanding that they don't need to keep going back and forth with someone on Fiverr in order to accomplish it, or that every time I reach out to someone through Fiverr, I may get a different result.
That's true too. I mean, there's definitely a value in having somebody consistent that you can work with, and knowing that this photographer can capture my angles, my essence, my everything, and make me look the greatest. And going to Fiverr for, post editing and retouching or something like that to make sure that your images are done the correct way you want them afterwards. So there's an advantage to both. I completely agree with you on that. I do want to take a second to shout out and say, if anybody has any specific questions for Ruth, who is a fashion photographer, a global fashion photographer who has shot for different brands, shot for individuals, as far as putting their content and their work out there to understand how to build their social media brand, et cetera, please feel free to use that question button below
Hmm.
and send questions in so that we can get those questions answered. We've taken a few and definitely are open to taking more. We've already been at this for over an hour. I didn't even realize how fast the time is going. So I'm not going to take too much more of your time. But I do want to say, for those who are in the fashion industry, for those who are watching, when it comes to fashion photography, especially when it comes to launching a brand, do you have any tips on what's the most important things that they should take advantage of or pay attention to when it comes to shooting content for launching a brand?
Ah, content for launching a brand. That depends on the brand. So if I'm doing clothing, for example, I think the key to it is understanding that I'm probably going to need e-commerce images, and that I'm going to need promotional material. And oftentimes that needs to be accomplished in two separate shoots and two different types of content.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when many people are starting out, they want to save as much money as they can, which I get it. So they try to combine everything into one place, one photo shoot, and try to utilize the photos in every single way possible.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but just understand that content for social media should be captured for social media, and content for e-commerce should be captured for e-commerce. Or
So it's
advertisement,
definitely,
Facebook ads or whatever. Yeah.
so it's definitely different places. There's two different things, and we shouldn't try to lump everything into one altogether to try to get it all done at once.
Yeah. Correct.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let me see. Hold on. I got a couple questions in here. So, all right, Rue, you ready for some questions? So, what are some good? I feel like Rue, you've helped me with this when I first started out. So, I'm gonna go with the most oldest to the newest. So, I'm gonna start with media. What's the best way to get stills during shooting in the process? So, how do you make sure to capture still
I think I lost it. I couldn't hear that.
when you're shooting? What's the best way to capture still images? Is that from shooting in or capturing still images in the video,
Is
or
that,
having a separate camera?
is it like
Are
you
you there?
being the videographer and capturing? It depends on the
No.
context of the
So if
photo.
someone, like, if the video being shot, someone else is in the video, what's the best way to capture stills? To have someone else with a separate camera
Yeah.
shooting stills, take stills from the video photography, the video,
If you're
the video.
shooting in high enough quality, then take stills from the video itself. But if you can and you want like that behind the scenes kind of imagery, if that's what you're looking for, then have someone there with a camera focusing only on capturing that photo, those photos. And that can be, for example, I know many of my shoots, oftentimes some of those tasks get defaulted to like a makeup artist. Like we're done, finished with the face and we're shooting, they may grab an iPhone or something and they start doing a lot of the behind the scenes imagery.
Okay, I have another question, and I know you can help with this one. What are some of the best iPhone apps for editing pictures
Ah, there's too many of them,
on
to
a
be honest.
budget?
There's
So
too,
for somebody on a budget,
it depends on what your budget is. There's many of them out there, and they all do something a little different. So I think it comes down one to the aesthetic you want to go for, but some of the bigger ones that I use are like Lightroom on my phone, and that's like $10 a month if you end up paying for it. And one of my favorite ones for a long time has been Snapseed.
yeah,
Yeah,
Snapseed has been saving for a long time.
yeah. So those
Definitely.
would be the two that I would say.
All right. What the best digital mood board or mood board? What kind of mood board or mood apps are there to use to kind of build some visuals?
Uh, I don't think there's too many good ones out there like that will make it for you. Most of them are apps that are intended for something else, and you can use them for mood board. I be honest, 90% of the time I just open Photoshop on my computer and I do the mood board there. It's just a little quicker. But some of the stuff I've used in the past that have worked out pretty well, especially like on an iPhone or on an iPad. There's an app by Adobe called Spark. It creates like a mini website, so it makes a great collage and it gives you a URL that you can share. That one is really useful. And I also, hold up, I have my iPad. I'm going to tell you exactly which ones, because I do tend to use my iPad for that. And Adobe Composition, so you can see a lot of Adobe apps on my end. Adobe Composition also is pretty good for creating those mood boards.
Okay, I might need to follow that one myself, but because I've made some mood boards and can't. Can you just give me like 2.5 seconds, really quick, on why Canva is not the preferred method for a lot of people who are very in depth in this field? Because I feel like I've talked to a lot of photographers and videographers and a lot of people, and when I create things in Canva, they're just like, "What is this? What is this Canva
Well,
situation?"
I don't think that'd be fair for me to say as a photographer, because I have to acknowledge like who's utilizing the tool. Is it a professional tool? I don't believe it to be. Is it a tool that gets the job done for a consumer? Yeah, then use it. For, you know what I mean? Like if you're not a graphic designer, I don't see why you want to learn Photoshop. It may not be something you're interested in learning. And if Canva can get the job done for what you needed to do, then use it.
That's fair. That's
Yeah.
definitely fair. I'm not a Adobe expert by any means, but I can throw something together really quick in Canva to get my idea across. So as long as it gets the idea across and I can communicate it to the other parties on the other end and they can execute, I'm totally fine with that. That works for me. So I do want to say I realized time has flown by. It's after 9 o'clock. I didn't even think it was going to be after 9 o'clock, but I think there were so many points that we hit in here, and there were so many things that we touched on, from apps you can use to why it's important to have content photography for a brand versus a model. I think there's so many individual things to talk about afterwards, but I do want to say to everybody listening, if you have any additional questions as it relates to fashion photography specifically, please feel free to send a message to either myself or Ruth Castro, anybody, and we'll definitely try to get those questions answered and make sure that you understand when it comes to building your brand, what's the right type of content to put out there, how's the best way to capture that content, and to make sure that you are staying on top of your game. Because right now in quarantine, we're all trying to figure out how to do the best that we can. So if there are any tips that we can give, we are here for it. Rue, if you want to give any last words or any, sound off to anybody listening, feel free to go ahead and do so now before you go.
What I would say right now is prepare yourself for when the world opens back up. So it doesn't catch you by surprise. Like, this is the time for planning. Get ready to understand we're going to be going out to a different world. So some of the things, the way we used to do it, may be a little different. But if you plan effectively, you can come out with a very, very unique action plan. And I think while it looks crazy for many small businesses and many creatives, 2020 can be a crazy good year once it starts to spread, especially because everybody's focused on online and online purchasing. And if your work is based online or you're providing a service, uh, it can be a potentially good time if you plan effectively. I know it's crazy to think about it, especially when we look at the news and everything that's happening. But I've seen an uptick from a photography standpoint, as an example. There's many people starting digital businesses that are going to need images. How are you going to service those people? How can you create content for those individuals? How do you do so safely? And many, many, many people are doing so right now. So start knocking on those doors. If you see a new website come up, reach out to them and offer your services.
Definitely, definitely,
Hmm.
definitely. Well, again, I do want to say to anybody who is listening, Rue is very accessible. He is very reachable. So feel free to reach out to his Instagram and reach out to me if you want to get through to Rue. But I do